Welcome to Fraserview Church's online gathering. We're really glad you're here with us. Follow along as you listen to Andrew talk about Jesus being the light in our lives. What does that mean for us? Follow along, answer the questions with people you're gathered together with, and worship side by side with Nick and the worship team.
Who is Jesus? This is the central question that defines us as his followers. For two reasons. The first being that we need to know how to live as people who are in his kingdom, part of his church, as we go about our lives. And secondly, we need to know this because we are on mission with him to explain who he is to other people. And this means we have to understand who Jesus is so that we can correctly explain Jesus to them. In a world in which there are many conflicting and false ideas about who Jesus is. As we know, John's Gospel is all about trying to explain who Jesus is, to explain him more clearly to us. And John always is doing this by placing Jesus into the story of God's relationship with people throughout the history of creation. We capture and see this in the Old Testament. And so in chapters 7, 8 and 9 of John's Gospel, John is revealing who Jesus is against the background of the Feast of the Tabernacles. the Jewish feasts help the Jews to remember who God is, how he's worked in their lives, and what he plans to do in the future. And this is exactly the same way that we use our Christian feasts to do this. We do this on a weekly basis, but we also do it at Christmas and with Advent, with Lent and Easter and Pentecost. We remind ourselves of who God is and what he is doing in our lives and where he is taking us. Hopefully you remember some of the details from last week about the Feast of the Tabernacles. It celebrated the time that Israel spent in the desert journeying with God towards the Promised Land. And it also occurred at the same time as the harvest of the grapes and the olives. And so hundreds of thousands of Israelites, of Jews, would come to Jerusalem to celebrate this feast, to celebrate God's abundant provision in the desert and in their current lives, and to look forward to how God was going to be with them in the future and how he was going to restore the entirety of Israel. And so as we heard last week, part of this festival, which was over 7 days, each morning there was a water drawing ceremony during which they remembered the water that God provided them from the rock in the desert in Exodus 17. And that expanded that image as a prophetic image that spoke of the water that would flow from God's presence in the temple to cause healing of the nations throughout the earth and to bring forth a harvest worthy of God. And we saw last week how Jesus stood up at this festival and announced that those who are thirsty should come and drink from him, and that those who drink from him would have rivers of water flowing from them. And Jesus is here announcing himself as the God who provides the river that will nourish the whole earth and bring forth a harvest. And he's saying that his followers by the Spirit will have the same river flow from them as they gather people in God's harvest. So we're going to continue at the festival this week by reading John 8, verses 12 to 20.
When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The Pharisees challenged him. "Here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid." Jesus answered, "Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid. For I know where I came from and where I am going. But you have no idea where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. But if I do judge, my decisions are true, because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it is written that a testimony of 2 witnesses is true. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me." Then they asked him, "Where is your Father?" "You do not know me or my Father," Jesus replied. "If you knew me, you would know my Father also." He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts, near the place where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him, because his hour had not yet come.
The water drawing ceremony isn't the only ceremony that occurs during the Feast of the Tabernacles. Later in the day, there is a lamp lighting ceremony. 4 golden lamps supplied with oil were put in the court of the women within the temple complex, and they stuck up over the walls, and they were said to illuminate the whole city of Jerusalem. So it must have been quite a spectacular sight. After their lighting, a joyous celebration ensued, with people dancing with torches in their hands and speaking words of praise. And this happened within the temple complex in the court of Israel and the court of the women. And the Levites would come out and play musical instruments on the steps that were between those 2 courts. The dancing and singing could last all night until the sun started to come up. Part of this celebration was that at the end of the festival there was a main candelabrum which was left until that last night to remind Israel that the full salvation of God was awaited in the future. And so the celebration ended then with 2 priests with trumpets ascending the steps and affirming the people's loyalty to Yahweh. The light is a reminder of the light that God provided for the Israelites as they escaped and journeyed from Egypt. And what we see in our passage here again is that Jesus, in this context with all this lighting going on and this speaking about how God is light, Jesus stands up, and our passage in verse 12 begins with the word "again." Again, Jesus stands up, and he's referring obviously back to what we talked about last week. Again, Jesus stands up and makes this remarkable claim about who he is. The light from the temple remembers the light that God gives, and they renew their commitment to journey with God, to live by God's light at all times. And here is Jesus standing up and saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of light. It's a great and amazing claim by Jesus. And so my question for you is, how has Jesus been light in your life? I often speak about the confusion that I experienced in my teenage years and when I couldn't really make sense of my inner life. And Jesus' light came into my life and it helped answer the questions about how my desires and my skills, my feelings and my thoughts all came together to make a whole person. It revealed places where I had some hurts that needed healing, and it revealed places that I was passionate and cared deeply. And Jesus' light revealed to me how I could be a whole person who could enter into a relationship with Jesus and with others. And that light continues to lead me towards the goal of being fully human, filled with Jesus' Spirit, and how I can contribute to the world to help humanity flourish and help God's creation flourish. How I am part of God's family, and how I am encouraged to be part of serving the world so it can flourish as God intended.
One of the songs that we do in Fraserview Kids, one of our worship songs, has these words. Jesus is the one who lights our way. He gives us hope for each new day. When the world feels dark and lonely, his love illuminates. And when I think about those words, there's a whole lot more, and the kids love that song, especially the whoa that they get to do. But there's two ways that I see the light here. First, light is a reference to the characteristic of Jesus, that it is him who I follow. And for me, it's those aha moments when I feel that the transforming power of Jesus in me. It's the reason I continue to fall deeply in love with him. So that's one way that I look at light. It's the characteristic. The second way is that it's an action. So when I think about this action, it's Jesus calling me to follow his lead when he lights the way up out of the darkness. And I believe that I'm called to do that when I hear the stories of other people. I'm the one to sit back and listen to the story, pay attention to the story, and hear the person struggling in their darkness and help them to see the light and the way out of that darkness. I recently had an experience with a dear friend of mine sitting at a park sharing a story for her. And you know that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees because you're so surrounded by your own story? That's kind of how I felt in that moment. I was so stuck in the darkness that there was no way for me to even see the light to find my way out. And it was this opportunity to share this story with my dear friend, that she was able to sit back and hear the story and say, so Lou, this is what I'm hearing, and she's able to show me the big story. I think that's what we're called to do when we're helping people to see the light, when we're helping them to find their way out of the darkness. Being in the light is so much better than sitting in the darkness. So I encourage you to share your stories so other people can help you to see the story and you don't get stuck in the details of the darkness that you are feeling.
So for me, two things come to mind when I hear this question. The first is that Jesus brings to light much of the darkness in my life. It is through Jesus that I've learned more about who I am as a person, and therefore some of the weaker and the darker areas of my life. A significant part for me of following Jesus is having the darkness in my life be brought towards the light so that Jesus can continually renew and restore me. The other thing that comes to mind is joy. The story of that lamp lighting ceremony and the celebration that ensues is beautiful, and it reminds me of the idea that Jesus is light to my life in that he brings joy to it. In truly joyful moments, whether it's laughing with friends or doing something outside like snowboarding or biking or whatever it may be, these things point to the evidence of Jesus in my life. Jesus uses both of these instances, the darkness that I try to hide from others, as well as the joy that I experience in fellowship with others, to show his light in my life.
Jesus is claiming to be the light which shows us the path that we should take. Light reveals the world as it is and how it should be. And it reveals who we are and who we are to become. And so light brings revelation. Something that is hidden is revealed to us by Jesus. Jesus' design becomes apparent in the light of his presence. And then when we embody Jesus, the revelation, the light becomes part of us. And then we have what we would describe as wisdom. The light, the presence of Jesus, becoming parts of us makes us wise people who are able to respond to each situation we find ourselves in our lives in a way which is congruent with who Jesus is part of following Jesus. We learn how to love as he does, how to have joy as he does, how to have sadness, how to face suffering as he does. We enter into being formed by the character of Jesus and being part of his kingdom values. And of course, living in our very complicated world where there is suffering and darkness as well as light, we need to be those people of wisdom so that we know how to respond rightly in each situation. And so when I first became a Christian, one of the things that I did frequently was pray that God would give me wisdom. And I think he did over the years. Though obviously I can continue to grow wiser still. But I would suggest that this is something that we should all be asking Jesus to do in our lives, to make us wise. And you know, I remember that piece from James where we are told that we do not have because we do not ask. And so it seems to me that we should be paying attention to how we become wise people and asking Jesus to do that in our life. The priority of this is great because I think we live in a cultural moment when the light has been suppressed. Our culture lacks wisdom. It is driven aimlessly by impulse and unfettered desire. And so for a moment I want to reflect on how we got to this moment in our culture. And so this is a quick cultural story. When we think of the cultural suite that we live in, it jumps back about 500 years to the Renaissance, the beginning of what's described as the Enlightenment. And this is a time when there was a rediscovery of the technology and philosophy from the ancient world. And this technology and philosophy combined with the Christian idea that the world was intelligible because God had made it and God was rational. And that he wished to be known and he could be known through his creation. And so what we see in that moment is that what we know of as science emerges as the study of what God has created. And of course science proves to be amazingly powerful in analysing the world, and it changes the world as its ideas are put to use. And so science slowly opens up this new era of optimism and possibility, and it slowly becomes a force that challenges many of the accepted truths about the world in which people lived. And the disadvantage of this process is that it ran further than it should have, so that over time the power of science becomes disconnected from its philosophical foundations. So it seems to people that science will provide all the answers. And in that sense it then enters in to being in the place that God used to have in society. Science comes to take this center stage in Western life. Science becomes the norms by which people make all their decisions and assume that everyone else will make their decisions, because it was always assumed that everyone would come to the same answers if they just followed the science. The problem is that as time went by and as we get into the 20th century, it becomes apparent that science doesn't live up to some of its grandiose claims. The two world wars in particular brought doubt about the idea that science would lead humanity into some sort of promised land, some utopia. So what emerges in our culture is a disappointment with science. And this has led to a certain amount of a distrust of reason, and instead a tendency to trust in our gut, our feelings, our desires, as the way to know how we should live and what the truth is. And so what happens there is we no longer think that necessarily we need to control and evaluate how we feel according to reason. You can just go with the flow of your feelings. And so what happens is, as those two streams of science and the reaction against science mix in our culture, we live at a very confusing cultural moment where it's very hard to make decisions because we don't know what truly brings us to truth, what brings us to light, which makes sense of the world that we live in. So these elements then become distractions from following Jesus. Following Jesus in his claim to be the light who reveals the world to us rightly, reveals who we are and reveals who God is, so that we can live in a way which is a response to that truth. So my question for you is, what distracts you from Jesus being the source of all light in your life? One of the aspects that concerns me as I look out at the way the world works is the way in which, because the world is difficult and complex, people find other people to follow, and they then kind of just hand over responsibility for their life to them. And we obviously see this in the world of influencers, what in earlier times was called sort of gurus, people who claim to have solutions to life and to present them to us. But we also see this often in the way our political leaders present themselves to us. They promise us a great vision of the future and protection from the enemies that may be around us. But they then fail to live up to those things that they promise, and instead use those narratives as a way to mislead us and control us. And obviously this is the same process that we see with influencers and gurus, who are much more interested in marketing and selling ideas to us. And this leads to a sense of confusion in our lives. Our lives become a patchwork of ideas which we have picked and mixed together from a whole range of sources. And often what we do is we change those ideas frequently, and this means that there's a loss of stability in our lives. We become a little bit fragmented, chasing the latest thing that is being sold to us. And of course, as too much change and too many new ideas trying to force into our lives, led by us always responding to our feelings and our desires, we end up feeling ungrounded and confused. We aren't sure what is the center of our lives. And so the great thing about Jesus, as he becomes the major light in our lives and helps us integrate the other sources of life and light that come from science and from people who have good advice to give us, as he helps us integrate those things, what he does is he gives us a vision of ourselves and the world and a family in which we exist, relationships which help ground us in the world as we give ourselves over those communities and allow those communities to show us the light of Jesus at work in the world.
I feel that a great distraction from following Jesus as a source of light is that sometimes we think that the truth is the thing that shines the light on the untruths of the world. And what I mean by that is sometimes people look at truth, and what does that mean? Maybe it is really clear scientific evidence. Maybe it's what the cultural norms are of the time. So that's the thing that points us to the truth. Or maybe it's the majority of people think this way, so that must point us to the truth. And all of those things distract us from finding and following the true light of Jesus toward the truth. And to be perfectly honest, when I say some people find the truth in this distorted way, I include myself in that, in the company of those some people. Sometimes I am distracted by some of those other ways that try to show me and point me to a truth that I really want to hear, or the truth that makes me happy. And I need to remind myself that Jesus is the one who points me to the true truth and uses that light to pull me out of darkness and to restore my soul and to transform me as I grow in him.
I know for myself I can mistake the source of light for other things that are still good but aren't the actual source of light in my life. And so what I mean by that is myself and people my age, I think we can put a lot of emphasis on good things like mental health and understanding our own personalities and having good relationships with others and knowing future plans. But the problem with all of this is when that becomes the source of light in my life. All of these things are good, but when elevated above Jesus, they can lead people and they can lead myself away from him. I think to have Jesus as the source of light in my life means that I can trust him above all for guidance, and I can trust him above all for my future plans and my personal growth. And so that's certainly the area that I'm challenging myself in, is not to put the source of all of my life and all of the light in my life in good things, but actually put them in Jesus. And so while all of these things are good, the challenge for me is to fully trust that Jesus is my source of light.
We are here again today to look at another All of Life interview, and we are talking about encountering God, and we have Teresa Haas with us today. Andrew Root reminds us of this. Sharing our stories with each other helps us to see God. Mm-hmm. It helps us to hear God calling us, not to something, but to someone. It helps us to step inside the curious events of our lives. So today we are blessed to hear about the curious events of your life, Teresa, and how that has led you to have an encounter with God. So tell us, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am second generation Canadian, as in my dad is from Germany and my mom is from Trinidad, but my sisters and I were born here. I am the third of three girls. The baby.
It's a good place to be. I'm a baby.
And because my parents were immigrants, we didn't have any family here. Mm. So we were not raised with aunts or uncles or grandparents. It was just us. I realize now the importance of having extended family. Mm. I had some traumatic experiences in my life. One being separated from my family at a young age because my mom had to have an operation, but that greatly impacted me, as well as having a very traumatic car accident where I had a traumatic brain injury at the age of 15. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we were raised as Christian, but I think it was more nominally. Like, mm-hmm. It was something to do. We went to church and stuff like that, but I don't think we had the faith in the sense, my mom would try and make us aware of, the wrongs in the world or the prejudices or whatnot. And, she'd be saying like, oh, you can't trust anybody and whatever. So I think a lot of times there was a lot of fear. And I struggled with anxiety because of the abandonment issue or whatnot. And after a traumatic brain injury, not being understood and wanting people to understand me and fearing rejection and all that sort of stuff. So I graduated, but I didn't think post-secondary education was a possibility for me because of my brain injury and anxiety. I sort of, lost faith in God. I didn't understand why he allowed this accident to happen that greatly affected my life. And then I, at some point, went back and I found another church and was really growing strong in it, but lost faith again because I didn't see dramatic change. Like, I would pray for something to happen and then it didn't. And I found myself to be always in a state of anxiety.
And anticipation, waiting for God to do your work.
Yeah. Well, anyways, somewhere down the line, I met my now ex-husband, who is Muslim, and had a son, Zachary, who I love dearly, but who's challenging. And
he is a delight.
He is a delight.
Energetic ball of delightfulness.
Yeah, who has some challenges. And but anyways, at some point, the realization that the marriage was not a healthy one, that I needed to save myself, if one might say that. And and so I've kind of navigated through life trying to find my way, working various jobs and whatnot, but and somehow found myself here.
And here you are. And so tell us, think about a time when you feel like you had an encounter with God. You and I talk a lot, and you share amazing experiences, and I see God working in your life all the time. And we talk about that. But I'm going to ask you to talk about one.
Yeah.
Find one that's...
At one time, as I said, when I kind of was, still believed in God, but wasn't going to church or anything like that, I was sort of distant. I remember that the TV was on, and there was a gospel singer singing, and it was actually for a funeral, and it was a big televised event, and the conviction of this woman's voice drew me to the, like, I literally went from, like, the kitchen to the living room. Like, I just had to hear this person, and all I know is that I thought, this woman knows God. And I remember saying, I want to have faith like that. That even in this tragic moment, this woman was singing, and it was like she was having a conversation directly to God.
Wow. That
led me to start reading my Bible again. And, putting my faith in God again. And then as I did that, I was getting encouraged, and then I was like, you know what? I need to find a church in which I feel a part of. I need to find a church that nurtures me. And anyways, I'd gone to a church on a Sunday, and I didn't really feel that that was the right fit. But later that day, Zach and I were going on a bike ride to the dike, and we stopped at a spot, and there was a young man and his daughter and everything, and we ended up stopping there and hanging out there, and Zach was playing with the little girl, and I was reading a book by Joyce Myers.
Yeah.
I think it's You Can Begin Again or something like that. And Zach said something, and he was like, oh yeah, you just want to read that book, by Joyce Myers. And the young man said, he goes, oh, is that Joyce Myers? And I said, yeah. He goes, are you a Christian? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, what church do you go to? I said, well, actually, I'm looking for a church. Yeah, I went to a church today, and I wasn't really feeling it and whatever. I said, I said, no offense, but the worship was kind of weak. And I said, and he was like, funny that you say that. I am the worship leader or the worship pastor at this church, like Fraserview. And I was like, really? He's like, I'm not trying to take you away from anywhere. Like, if you found a place, but maybe come by and check us out. And yeah, so
and
anyways, I came, I saw, I worshipped, I'm here.
Yeah. I remember that day you came.
Yeah. Oh wow, it was incredible. I just love the down to earthness. I love the fact that I just felt welcomed. I just felt like it was a safe space for me to come in. I didn't have to be dressed up.
Right.
I didn't have to have that air of perfection. It just felt like a real place where there were real people. And and I love the worship. And
I look forward to the time when our real people are here again.
Yes.
But I recall when you came, you were uninhibited in your worship. And I think that's what I love about you. When I sometimes look over at you, I see that your eyes are closed, your hands are open, you are full in. And, that spirit of having that connection, that conversation with God, which is what you talked about with the first woman you saw on TV who was worshiping. It's very cool. So when you think of that experience, how do you think that has helped to shape you as a follower of Jesus?
Well, that experience of, first of all, in brokenness, still being loved, even in brokenness. Being loved even in brokenness, being accepted. You know how Jesus says, come all ye who labor and weary, and I will give you rest. church is not a place to be perfect. It's a place to come and to be real and to learn and grow and to bring our wounds and our sorrow and whatnot, but a place that is welcoming, that we can grow and understand one another and support one another. I think if my parents, for example, had extended family, you know, because my mom had to have this operation, I would not have been sent to you know, a trusted acquaintance, but still not someone who was very close, right?
Right.
And that was, like, there was nothing wrong, like nothing bad happened, but separation from immediate caregivers at a very young age can have a very, is very impactful, or can be very impactful. And I think, yeah, I suffered from fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, a lot of those things, and because of a lot of those fears, it was afraid to be known, afraid to reveal those things. You know, if you knew how broken I was, would you still love me? If you knew how troubled I was, would you really accept me? And trying to find, you know...
And so you're feeling that from Jesus. You're feeling the brokenness of the world, of yourself. And the remedy for that is to feel like you belong.
Oh, I think everybody desires to be loved, accepted, understood, and supported. I mean, oh my gosh, this world would be such a different place if everybody felt loved, accepted, forgiven of our mistakes, our bad choices, things that we do, you know, looking for love in all the wrong places, the bad mistakes that we make, that there's nothing that we can do that will separate us from the love of God through Jesus. So,
that is such a beautiful story, Teresa. And as I said, I love sitting and talking with you and talking with you at our home church and just sharing stories. And that's really what this is about. Yes. Encountering God in our stories, being willing to be vulnerable enough to step out there and say, this is who I really am. Do you still love me? Do you, this church, church, do you still love me? Because I know Jesus does.
Yes.
But church, do you still welcome me?
And the dangers of judgment. The dangers of judgment. And how we really don't have the right to judge. God calls us to love, not to judge.
Yeah. Wow. I just love talking with you.
Ah, thank you. Ditto.
You've given us a real vantage point into the brokenness of the world, into what it means to develop your character in Jesus, and how to continue to move forward in community. You speak about community from your family to an extended family, from your community of a church. What does that mean? What is that? What kind of value does that bring into your world? So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I want to pray with you. And
Sure.
for all the people in our community who have stories to share. This is an opportunity to share your story. And I hope, Teresa, pass it around to people and say, this is a great chance for you to share your story, to be known.
To be known.
To be known, so that you can continue that conversation with God in a community that's trusted, be it your extended family or our community of the church. So let me pray.
Amen.
For you. Jesus, thank you so much for your presence in Teresa's life. I know that we all walk through this life, Lord, and sometimes we find ourselves in the valleys and sometimes we find ourselves on the mountaintops. And I have had the privilege of being in both of those places with Teresa as she processes life and the challenges and the joys that come along with living this glorious life for you, sometimes questioning, Lord, where are you? Lord, why didn't you answer my prayers? And it's in those vulnerable moments that, in the conversations that I've had with Teresa and with other people, where I'm able to step back and say, gee, I wonder if God was there. Have you stopped and looked there? Because we often look in very specific places for you, Lord, but maybe we need to lift that rock and look underneath and see, were you there? So God, I ask you to be with all of us as we journey those valleys and those mountaintops, as we share our stories, as we are vulnerable to share our stories of hurt and grief, knowing that you are the one who completely accepts us and shows us that we belong, and that you have created your church people to gather around each of us, to share that feeling of brotherly and sisterly love. We are siblings to each other and we belong. Thank you, Lord, for the people of Fraserview. Thank you for Teresa's story. And thank you for just being with us in those moments that we wonder where you are, and also in those moments where we know exactly where you are. So thank you, Lord. We pray all of this in your glorious name. Amen.
Amen.
Lord,
hope you enjoyed today's gathering time and got a sense of what it means for Jesus to be the light in our lives. As always, we are gardening here on Wednesdays from 6 to 8 o'clock. Come on and join us. Lots of hands together makes little work for all of us. So we'd really love to see you. Also attached in the email is a document that has a number of prayer requests from our community, prayer and praise from our community. We really encourage you to open that up and spend some time this week in prayer for those people. So as always, be blessed, stay safe, and we look forward to gathering together with you someday soon.